Hello and welcome. We will be discussing the plant Eria Jarensis and its supposed stimulant. So we'll be talking about central nervous system stimulation. The backbone of most central nervous stimulants is phenylethylamine. It has an alpha carbon, beta carbon, and off the beta carbon it has a benzene ring. The amine is polar, the benzene ring is nonpolar. So there are essentially three modalities to create central nervous stimulation. The first is direct receptor activation involving norepinephrine. The second is reuptake inhibition, and then as a releasing agent. So the first issue for a compound to cause central nervous stimulation is getting to the blood in sufficient quantities and then getting from the blood through the blood-brain barrier. Phenylethylamine has two polarities, a non-polar benzene ring and a polar amine. This is called amphipathism, which is the difference between the two. And so amphipathic compounds are, for the most part, able to cross the blood-brain barrier. So we've kind of met that criteria. The second is ability to get into the blood in strong concentrations. The problem with phenylethylamine is that it is rapidly deactivated by phase 1 and phase 2 metabolism in the liver and also in the brain. The main one that you have to worry about is monoamine oxidase. Monoamine oxidase goes and cleaves the amine, makes them both inert. And so there's a very simple way to sterically interfere with monoamine oxidase is to put a methyl group on the alpha carbon. This sterically interferes with monoamine oxidase. So if you look at the serum concentration versus time, phenylethylamine has a very quick peak and then a very quick elimination. Like I said, it's susceptible to multiple types of metabolism and deactivation. Adding the alpha methyl group creates the compound amphetamine, which of course makes a stronger peak and a slower elimination. Going back up to the modalities for stimulation, phenylethylamine is basically able to act as a mild reuptake inhibitor and slight releasing agent. And looking at phenylethylamine, if you take large enough dose, you will feel something. Some people characterize it as euphoria, some people characterize it as dysphoria. In any case, you feel something. Adding the alpha methyl group, it is able to interact with the various modalities, reuptake inhibition and releasing, in a longer way. It's called law of mass action. So in the brain, you have the presynaptic neuron and the postsynaptic neuron, and then you have the synaptic gap. As there are vesicles containing norepinephrine in here, so you want these to go and interact with the receptors here And so how these compounds will work is that as a releasing agent, it'll interact with calcium and cause the vesicles to fuse to the membrane and dump the norepinephrine here to interact with the receptor. What happens for recycling is that the norepinephrine is sent back, called reuptake inhibition. Well, a compound is able to block that, and it will increase the time that the norepinephrine is in the gap. And then, of course, if the compound is able to directly work with the receptor, then you can get stimulation that way as well. So we talked about phenylethylamine. Where you can interfere with monoamine oxidase. Now, if you add an N-methyl, this creates meth. Now, meth is a kinetic parameter. Adding an N-methyl, if you only add an N-methyl, it just increases its peak and its duration prior to trough. And so the half-life is greatly extended. Now, we know some compounds that have been released recently called ephedrine. So very similar to here, but the structure-activity relationship is that it has a hydroxyl here, which increases direct receptor activation. And when you do this, you decrease its ability to act as reuptake inhibitor and as a releasing compound. So this is more of a direct receptor, and we're removing stereochemistry here. But this is more direct receptor activation rather than the rest. It also has decreased amphipathism, so that's decreased blood-brain barrier penetration. And as you know, there's a huge difference between ephedrine and methamphetamine. If you want complete direct receptor activation, you have to add some hydroxyls to the benzene ring. Again, changing the amphipathism, changes the polarity of the compound. We're not worried about that because this compound's already in the brain. It does not have to cross the blood-brain barrier. For example, if you put norepinephrine into a peripheral IV, it will not make it into the blood-brain barrier or pass through it into the brain. Now, there have been some compounds that come out recently without the benzene ring. And again, non-polar, polar. So we got that. We got amphipathism here. We have an alpha methyl. So we have better kinetics. And this is called 1,3-dimethyl amylamine. And this was in pre-workout things years ago. I believe it is banned. But the structure-activity relationship is sound. Going to the compound of interest, this supposedly is a PEA, a phenylethylamine that is extracted from the herb Eria, Jarensis. Now, there's a lot of different ways to write this. some of the ways supplement manufacturers are writing it is gibberish. The correct way to write this in dimethyl 2-PEA. You can break this down further in dimethyl 2-phenyl-FN1 amine, but this is the best way to write it, I believe. In dimethyl, so the two methyl groups off of the N, and this is a 2-PEA. So this is the best way to write it. So as we looked up the structure activity analysis here, it has the nonpolar region, and it has a decreased polarity here. So it's relatively polar, but the two carbons that are attached to the nitrogen make it decrease. So the polarity at the amine is down, so it's decreased amphipathism, decreased blood-brain barrier penetration. Does not have an alpha methyl substituent. And it has two carbons coming off of the nitrogen. So the problem is that when there's no alpha methyl, the carbons coming off the nitrogen mean less. You can actually have F and so on, carbons coming off. It seems like it would sterically inhibit monoamine oxidase, but it does not, bear that out without the alpha methyl. So as the chains get longer off the nitrogen, it just seems that the direct receptor activation is down, and its ability to active as a reuptake inhibitor and releasing agent are also down. So I think ultimately, in comparison to PEA, phenylethylamine, that really doesn't have any properties that would suggest a greater stimulatory. I think if you do pharmacokinetics of this, if you look at PEA and then you look at N-dimethyl 2-PEA, I don't think the peak will be as big, and there will be increased half-life. But again, it's still ripe for monoamine oxidase to cleave the amine. Nothing's really going to sterically interfere with that. It can also, you can also conjugate the benzene ring quite easily. There's nothing to prevent that. So I think, metabolically, it's just maybe a slightly longer half-life. It could even be considerably longer half-life, but blood-brain barrier penetration will be down. Its ability to act as a direct receptor agonist will be down. And as there's no substituents here for direct receptor agonism, the utility of this compound will be limited in the context of limited blood-brain barrier penetration. So I think, if you look at supplement companies, they add, the nomenclature they add is to confuse people, and the pharmacology is very vague when they give that kind of thing. But if you want IUPAC nomenclature, it would be up here, and then you can look in the literature. There's nothing here in the literature that would suggest that it would do anything other than PEA light and longer duration of action. I think the only thing it would be limited to would be as a releasing agent, and may be mostly restricted to the periphery. So may affect blood pressure, but likely non-tangibly. And so, you know, the PEA analogs, again, have been studied since the 1940s when they realized putting an alpha methyl changes the character of phenylethylamine substantially. And so the likelihood that it's going to do anything is very low. I think it's a novel compound. Whether or not it actually comes from Eria, Jarensis is another topic, but I think it's mostly not going to do much here. So if anybody watches this, I plan to do the next one on turkesterone. So if people watch it, I'll make some other videos, and certainly if you have any questions, give me a holler. All right, thank you.